Greetings and salutations to our fine podcast audience. Welcome to episode 158.
We made it.
We made it, and today, if you're listening to it on the day that it drops, it is Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy birthday, Leah. It's
Oh.
Leah Davenport's birthday.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that.
I'll say this, producer Charlie, who's married to Leah Davenport. 2 days before that, that will be his birthday.
Charlie, I just want to say, son, you lucked out. You don't have to buy two separate gifts, man. Look at you. You got Valentine's Day and your wife's birthday on the same day.
And Charlie is not going to be in town. Charlie, are you going to be watching this episode when it drops on your cruise?
He will not.
Okay,
He will not be
Charlie,
watching.
if you
better
weren't on a cruise, would you be watching this episode?
No.
Absolutely.
No.
Okay, very good. Charlie,
When
if
you
you've
have
been here,
to-
Charlie said absolutely not
Absolutely
to
not.
both answers of this question.
When you have to edit things, you've watched it more than you wanted to.
Oh.
Charlie, before you had to edit this, were you ever watching this podcast?
Absolutely,
absolutely
not.
Okay, very good. Very good to know.
Do you actually listen while we're talking? Absolutely not.
Waits till we stop and goes, oh, let's hit stop. Yeah. That's okay. That's what we pay him to do.
That's right. It's all good. We pay him nothing.
Maybe a drink. He gets a Coke.
He does
So.
every time.
So here we are. As I said, it's Valentine's Day, and if you remember last week, I teased the topic. It's a perfect topic for Valentine's Day, don't you think?
I don't remember what it is.
Have you told us? Oh, you have told us.
I did tell you.
I just remember what it is.
Today
Yeah, it's
we're discussing a question about demons.
Oh,
That's true.
and are you equating Cupid as a demon?
Is Cupid a demon?
He looks like he could
I
be a
think
little.
so
he
because
could be a
he's
little
supposed
devil.
to be like a cherub, right? But like the cherubim as described.
Oh, he's a cherub.
He's a cherub. That's what the
He
little
doesn't look
baby.
at all like a
Baby
cherub.
angel.
But the
No, that's not the
cherubim
way-
as
they're
dis-
fearsome.
Yeah, they're terrifying. They're like animals with wings, and they're horrifying. But
That's what he's supposed to be.
that's what they call those little babies with wings.
But they don't know.
Baby, oh my!
Cherub.
I
It's
didn't
kind of
know that.
scary to me.
Yeah, I think he's a demon.
If I saw a baby with wings flying around with a bow and arrow pointed at
Shooting
me,
people.
I wouldn't feel love
That'd
in
be
my
bad.
heart. You know?
Yeah, I've
That's
actually seen
taking
Miss-
over my free will, making me love other people.
You know, I've
It doesn't
seen
sound-
Miss Piggy as Cupid too. So it's a pig with wings, but it's
Wow.
clearly Miss Piggy.
That's random. Okay. So, the question today, as I've already said, is about demon possession. So, we're going to answer this one. This
But
should-
not about Cupid.
No, but this should be fun. Here's the question. What's the deal with the demons that Jesus...
What is the deal?
I wonder if they thought it that
It
way.
was
when
somebody from Roopville that asked this question.
Oh, I could
What's
read-
up with that? What's up with that?
I could read it redneck style, but I won't.
All right.
What's the deal with the demons that Jesus cast out in the Bible? I picture it being a major Hollywood-style exorcism, but I can't imagine that demon possessions were really that common, evident, and dramatic. Can you help me understand? And do you think we still have those types of demon possessions today? Those types of demon possessions today?
So I'm guessing when they say, what was the question? What's the deal with the demons?
Yeah, they want to know what's
Jesus
the deal.
cast out in the Bible.
What's the deal? What's the deal, Nathan?
So, well, the question they said was they can't imagine it was that common, evident, or what? Dramatic as they are in the Hollywood movies. I'm guessing
I
is
think
what they
so.
Because I was going to say, it obviously was evident enough in the one story that I know you're about to preach on out of Mark,
Yeah.
because the guys living outside the town, they don't even go near the cemetery
He
more.
scares everybody in his day.
Yeah, so it's evident in that sense. Now, if what you mean is it's not evident where, like, because I'm a big horror movie fan. I love, especially movies about exorcisms and that's a big one for me. And their facial features change, their skin color change, like they're like almost grayish in the way their eyes change. Now, if that's what you mean, no, I'm not confident but maybe it was. I don't know. But it obviously was evident to the people, not just Jesus. It was evident to the townspeople. Something ain't right with this guy. Maybe they didn't call it demonic, but they looked and said, that guy's scary enough, we're not going to go near him.
Yeah, and they tried to chain him up and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's evident. Now, whether it's common, we were talking about this before, I don't know how common it was because we only have a handful of accounts over 3 years in Jesus' ministry. That's still more common than it's been in my lifetime in encountering people that were evidently demonically possessed.
Yeah, and I will say, I mentioned this to the guys before we hit record too, that I agree with Nathan. I have not had personal experience with that, but I do have dear friends of mine who have been in other cultures,
Right.
and done like mission work overseas in certain cultures where, and I fully trust these guys. I don't think they'd come back and just flat out lie to me, and they have experienced what they would determine as demon possession because I think, this is just my opinion, so I could totally be wrong about this, but I just think that part of the reason we don't see it as evident and obvious in our culture is because I think of where we are as a culture in what we believe and what we don't believe. I think there are a lot of cultures that it's just baked into the culture that the spiritual realm is real, and they
Right.
see that. And so I think in that kind of a culture, Satan don't have to hide himself
No.
and be slick and behind the scenes, because actually in our culture, because there's not a whole lot of belief in that kind of stuff, for him to be out front in that kind of way would actually have the opposite effect on people. It would actually draw them to belief in the supernatural and hope and possibly belief in trusting God. And I don't think that's what Satan wants.
Right.
I think he wants the opposite. And so I think he's got our culture in a perfect position where we're very doubtful of that kind of thing. We trust a whole lot in what we can feel, see, and experience, scientific type stuff. And so I think in our culture, a lot of times we've explained this away
I do too.
Oh,
through
sure.
scientific means. And so therefore, Satan doesn't need to tip his hand.
Well,
do
and
that
there's a
kind of thing.
comfortability to it. And what I mean, there's a comfortability to being able to explain things away
Mhm.
that our culture has that I don't think is even intellectual. I want to feel comfortable that the world, we were talking about this in the last episode, of that life's not a mystery, everything's explainable, you just got to get to the root of it, and this idea of all of those kind of things. And I remember listening to, I think it was just a podcast, it may have been a sermon, but a pastor that I really respect who started the 24/7 prayer movement, and he was talking about prayer, and in particular about the idea of evil and how uncomfortable we are as a society with the concept of evil, and just like the idea of just people doing things to cause harm. The idea there is no like deeper hurt that's behind it or any of those kind of things. And he quoted this part from the Hannibal Lecter series. I think people are still, I think he's enough in the cultural context. Obviously a fictional character. But in the Silence of the Lambs novel, there's a scene where Clarice, who is this FBI profiler, she's a psychologist for the FBI, and she's having a conversation, and she's trying to figure out, like, at what age did something happen that caused you to decide to kill all these people? And he basically tells this story where he was 5 years old, and he knew at 5 he wanted to. And then he says this part, he says, it makes you comfortable to believe that something happened to cause me to do this, when I have just he goes, you aren't comfortable with the idea of evil for evil's sake. And then this pastor took it on, he goes, and that, he says, you see that with people talking about Hitler a lot, where people will look at just the evil that someone like Hitler could do, and they want to go, you hear people say this, well, he was this artist, and something happened when he was an artist, or there were these things, and those things all may have contributed, but we feel comfortable knowing if someone would have raised him better, or if someone would have done this better. But this idea that someone, for whatever reason, and maybe raising and all those things part of it, would give themselves over to the evil desires and thoughts to a point that what they would do is so inhumane. That's the best word. It doesn't even appear, we couldn't imagine a human being doing that. Now, I'm not saying that, don't hear me say that to say that Hitler was demon-possessed. What I'm saying is the evil that he perpetrated onto the world and to other human beings, I believe, was also interacting with a spiritual force of evil that is active in the world. That our enemy, Satan, was more than happy to contribute to that evil. Just as we believe it's possible for those who follow Jesus to interact with a spiritual reality of the kingdom of God and of God's work in the world. And I know that's not the direct answer to this question of.
Well, so I think, you talk about spiritual possession, people tend to think about a person getting to a place, which it was in Jesus' day, where they can't be controlled. But, it appears they're not controlling themselves, which maybe they're not, because they're possessed. They've given themselves over to it. Because, the power at work from the evil one does have a malevolent kind of nature to it, it would be natural that as you begin to dabble with it and you begin to try to play with it, it might get to the place that you don't control it anymore, because that particular force of the spiritual power that works against the power of God doesn't care for human beings.
Right.
God loves human beings. God made human beings. This force is against everything that God made as good. So I could see the place that it becomes possession. But we do talk about being filled with the Spirit of God. I'm sorry for hitting my microphone there, Charlie. But so if I can be filled with the Spirit and it doesn't become possession to me and that I don't get to still be in control, the reason for that is because God himself still honors me. He honors my right to be myself, to take back, to not be with him. I'm not possessed by the Spirit of God, but I do believe. So I've told you all, I think I've told before, I don't know if on the podcast or not, when I was very new at this whole thing, I had an encounter with a young person who they told me they had been involved with Satan worship, and their presence in my presence there was a presence about it that was not like any human being I had ever encountered, to the point that I was scared. I have a book still on my bookshelf that I bought from a professor of mine that I had heard had been involved in casting out demons. It's called Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered.
Wow,
and,
that's a good title, right?
And it tells of his encounters and how to go about it. And thankfully, I didn't have any more encounters with that. I also had an encounter when I was not a Christian, that I was in New Orleans, and there was an overt kind of place that I was, that even as a non-Christian, there was a sense of things ain't right here. There was a sense of just evil kind of feeling that I could feel, and I wasn't even trying to be good. There was a sense that this ain't right. And so do we have it in our day? I think there are people that certainly they're filled with evil. They get to the place, and we don't want to call it that, people who do mass shootings, or they do things in racist kind of terms where they follow the power of evil. And maybe it doesn't come to the point that they're out of control, but they certainly have decided in those moments to follow the spiritual powers of evil. And I also have friends that are in other countries where there's overt pagan worship, where I really think a part of what satanic worship and pagan worship is, you're choosing a god to use. Most pagan worship is, I'm making a sacrifice to gain something in this world. I want this God to do something for me. I want to achieve something. And I'm not beyond believing that the spiritual power of the evil one wouldn't be willing to help me in some way to eventually get me under his power. And he has malevolent kind of desires for me. He will use me up for his benefit, where God will not do that. God will not do. So I don't know if it's Hollywood. I
think to the point you just said, I want to add this. Jesus specifically mentions the thing you talk about being filled with the Spirit when he talks about casting out demons from a person, and he says they need to be filled with the Holy Spirit, because he gives the example of what happens when a strong man breaks into a home and you get them out. He says, if you don't have a stronger man to come into that home, he says, he'll come back with even stronger people the next time and try and do it again. And I don't know that that is only talking about demonic possession, because what seems to be clear, to me at least, especially in the book of Mark, Jesus considered all of his work that he was doing pushing back the powers of darkness.
That's right.
Whether it was someone who was fully possessed and out of control of their body, or a person who was, as you preached on, a person who felt sickness, which is the effect of sin into our world, of bringing death and destruction to things, or just a person trapped in a sinful lifestyle that they couldn't get out of. We, I think, want to, as modern people, want to separate all those things into their own category. There are people who are sick, and that has nothing to do with spiritual realities. There are people who make bad choices, and if you're not spiritual, you think that has no spiritual component. That's psychological, it's emotional, it's upbringing, it's sociological. And if you're a Christian, you might accept there's a spiritual component of that. And then there's this other thing called demonic possession, which you might totally outrule if you don't believe in anything spiritual. Or if you're a Christian, it feels very mystical and you can't understand. And it seems to Jesus, he saw all of these as different tools in the arsenal of the power of evil. And Jesus came back to bring about a kingdom that one day, when it is completely brought about, all of that stuff is done.
Well, and
All of it is gone.
I'll say that there is a thought theologically that when Jesus died on the cross and was resurrected, it is a blow. Satan knows he's done at that moment. He meant the cross to put the plan, and Jesus turns the whole thing on its head, and he's resurrected, and death is defeated at the cross and at the resurrection. Now, people still die, but Satan knows, and so there is a theological thought that the reason we don't see as much of the demon stuff is Jesus began to push all of that back.
Sure.
The power of the church has pushed that back in the world where that did not exist before Jesus was resurrected and the church was unleashed into the world, that the power of the gospel has been pushing this back. So does it still exist? It does. But we don't maybe see it as much as there was at one time because the power of the gospel has been at work now for thousands of years.
Right.
I like that thought.
So I don't know that that's
Yeah.
the case, but that is one thought. I also sort of believe that's probably the truth.
Makes sense to me.
A lot of other evil that was normal that we can't hardly imagine. The thought that we have that everybody deserves dignity, we take it as a given. It did not exist 2,000 years ago. It didn't exist 1,000 years ago. It has slowly been coming into the world through the power of the gospel that now in places that are totally secular, they believe it. They just don't know why they believe it. They don't have a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
But they stand on it.
Stealing from God.
That's right.
There's a book by that title. All right. So, that's all I got to say about demons. Y'all got anything else?
I don't like to mess with them. I really don't.
I ain't worried about it.
I'm not worried about it, but I've had a couple of creepy experiences where I just go, "That's creepy."
Yeah.
It's creepy to me.
Definitely. All right. Well, as I said a couple of weeks ago, you guys are continuing to send us in questions, and so we've got a big old list. I don't have a preview for next week, so you're just going to have to come back and find out. But we're going to tackle the next question on the list next week.
Just doing them in order, knocking them off one at a time.
As you send them in, we answer them in
so
that
get them
order.
in first.
Yeah. The quicker you get it in, the quicker you'll hear the answer. So next week, we'll get another one. Y'all have a good one. See ya.
Bye.